Imagine you could leap through time at will, go back to the past to change history, or shoot into the future to see what happens. The concept of time travel has long fascinated people, appearing in much science fiction and even being considered by physicists. Yet behind its allure, time travel brings a set of logical puzzles called time paradoxes. These paradoxes are like intricate knots in the thread of cause and effect. Unless untied, they appear contradictory or even impossible. In this narrative monologue, we'll dive deeply into the various kinds of time travel paradoxes. With a conversational style that remains scientifically and philosophically accurate, we'll trace famous paradoxes such as the grandfather paradox, the bootstrap paradox, the predestination paradox, as well as the ideas of causal loops and the Novikov self-consistency principle. Not only that, we'll also explore proposed solutions from dual timelines and parallel universes in science fiction to viewpoints from quantum physics and philosophy about time and causality. Get ready for a long journey through these astonishing ideas. Let's begin by understanding why time travel challenges the causal laws we take for granted in everyday life. From childhood, we learn that every effect has a cause, and that causes always come before effects. This is the principle of causality, the foundation of our universe's logic. The example is simple. If you strike a match, the cause, only then does the flame ignite, the effect. The flame can't ignite before the match is struck. We never see effects preceding their causes in daily life. For us, time flows forward, from the past to the present to the future, carrying an apparently linear, orderly sequence of events. But what if this flow could be skipped across or reversed? Traveling to the past would mean the effect of an action, for example, a change in the past, could be felt before the original cause occurred. That's like seeing a flame before striking a match, something that violates common sense. This is why the idea of time travel is so prone to slamming into the walls of logic and creating paradoxes. A time paradox arises when the chain of cause and effect gets scrambled. An effect can influence its own cause, or a sequence of events closes into a loop. Before we get into concrete examples, imagine a simple scenario. You receive a mysterious letter containing precise instructions for winning the lottery. You follow the instructions, win the lottery, and then use a time machine to go back one day and hand that same letter to your past self. The question is, who wrote the instructions in the first place? The letter appears to have come from nowhere. This is the seed of one of the paradoxes we'll discuss. Another example. If you return to the past and prevent the event that motivated you to go back, what happens to the time journey itself? These are the kinds of questions that make up time paradoxes. Now let's discuss, one by one, the most famous kinds of time travel paradoxes. Each will be explained with analogies, science fiction examples, related physics and philosophical implications. Welcome to the labyrinth of time logic. One of the most classic and frequently discussed paradoxes of time travel is the grandfather paradox. Its core is simple, yet startling. What if you went back and prevented your own birth? For instance, you travel to your grandfather's youth and, whether intentionally or by accident, cause his death before he has children, meaning one of your parents is never born. If your parent is never born, then neither are you. But if you aren't born, how could you have traveled back and killed your grandfather? This is a circle of contradiction that seems impossible to resolve. The grandfather paradox is a consistency paradox. It occurs when the past is altered in a way that clashes with historical facts that have already occurred. In the original history, your grandfather lives, your parent is born, then you are born. Your attempt to change the past, killing your grandfather, creates a new history in which you are not born, but that change cannot be reconciled with the original history without violating logic. This is a temporal contradiction, a situation in which past A and past B cancel each other out. This paradox isn't just theoretical, it's often used in science fiction. A popular example is the film Back to the Future, 1985. Marty McFly accidentally interferes with his parents' meeting in the past. As a result, their relationship is threatened, which means Marty might never be born. The film depicts the effects of this paradox by showing Marty's family photo fade, a symbol that his existence is at risk. Back to the Future ultimately resolves the paradox in a fictional way. Marty succeeds in bringing his parents together again, restoring his existence. But logically, the scenario raises a thorny question. What if Marty fails and never exists to save his parents? We return to the contradiction.
To visualize this paradox, imagine a billiard ball colliding with itself. There's a well-known diagram physicists use to explain consistency paradoxes. A billiard ball enters a time machine in the form of a wormhole, emerges in the past, and strikes its earlier self hard enough to knock the earlier ball off course so it fails to enter the wormhole. As a result, the ball never time travels, so there was never a ball in the past to strike itself. The diagram captures the same deadlock as the grandfather paradox. The past event, the ball being struck, or the grandfather being killed, erases the cause of that very event, the time-traveling ball or the time traveler. We face the questions, if the ball never entered the wormhole, who struck it? Or, if you were never born, who killed your grandfather? The grandfather paradox has many variants. One is the Hitler paradox. What if someone goes back to the 1930s and kills Adolf Hitler to prevent World War II? Morally appealing as it may sound, it spawns the same puzzle. If Hitler is killed before rising to power and the war never happens, there is no motivation for a time traveler from a future without the war to go back and kill him. The act erases the reason for the act. Likewise, there's the idea of auto-infanticide, killing oneself as a baby. If you do that, you erase your own existence. All these scenarios are offspring of the same consistency paradox. Changing the past yields a timeline inconsistent with the changer's origin. The grandfather paradox has led many to conclude that time travel to the past is logically impossible. Some philosophers, such as Bradley Dowden, have argued that the mere existence of such paradoxes is enough to rule out backward time travel. How does the universe handle a contradiction? In classical logic, contradictions can't stand. They signal a faulty premise. Perhaps the faulty premise here is the assumption that time travel itself is possible. Interestingly, not all scientists and philosophers give up because of this paradox. There are proposals that resolve it without banning time travel. Let's trace two famous approaches. First, the Novikov self-consistency principle, which says the universe won't allow paradoxes to occur, i.e., you can stroll around the past, but you can't change anything in a way that's inconsistent with what already happened. And second, multiple timelines or parallel universes, which says that any attempt to change the past creates a new timeline, so there's no contradiction within a single timeline. Before that, however, we need to recognize another paradox, not about killing a grandfather or preventing a birth, but about circular origins. This is the bootstrap paradox. You may have heard the phrase, pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps. It means attempting the impossible, like standing up by tugging on your own shoestraps. The bootstrap paradox takes its name from this idiom. Also known as the ontological paradox, it's a type of time paradox in which something, an object, information, or even a person, exists without a clear origin. The chain of cause and effect forms a closed loop. Event A causes B, B causes C, and C in turn causes A. The result is that A causes itself. There is no true beginning to the cycle. Here's a clarifying example. In the future, you find a manual for building a time machine. You use it to build one and go back, handing the same manual to your younger self. Your younger self will build the same machine, and so on. The question: who wrote the manual? The book exists, circulating from future to past, but apparently was never written by anyone. It pulls itself up by its own bootstraps out of nowhere. That's the heart of the bootstrap paradox. An object or information appears without a creator. Ontologically, ontology being the philosophy of existence, it's baffling, like a creation without a creator. A famous example in science fiction is Robert A. Heinlein's short story, Ash All You Zombies, 1958, adapted as the film Predestination, 2014. Through a complex series of time travels, an individual becomes both the father and the mother of themselves via gender change and time travel. The result is an endless loop in which the person's entire family tree consists only of themselves. They are both the beginning and the end of their lineage. This is an extreme bootstrap paradox, a human who is born with no parents other than themselves. Another, perhaps more easy example, in the film Somewhere in Time, 1980, an elderly woman gives the male lead an antique pocket watch. He later travels back, falls in love with the younger version of the woman, and, in the past, gives her that same watch as a gift. She keeps it all her life until she is old, and then hands it back to the same man, who is still young from the future. The watch circulates in a time loop, from the old woman to the young man to the young woman, back to the old woman, without ever being purchased or made outside that loop. Where did the watch originate? It's unclear. It seems to have always existed, trapped in the time loop.
Science fiction often serves up mind-bending stories like this. Doctor Who has used a Beethoven example. Suppose you're a fan and go back to the 1700s to meet him, only to find he never existed. Because you brought Beethoven's scores from the future, you publish the music in that era, and the public comes to know Beethoven's works. The music exists because you brought it, and you could bring it because you knew it as Beethoven's, although Beethoven never existed. The music becomes a time djinn, existing without an original creator, purely because of the time loop. Note that the bootstrap paradox doesn't always feel as contradictory as the grandfather paradox. Logically, a closed causal loop can be internally consistent. No rule is violated within the loop. In the pocket watch case, the timeline is consistent. The watch circulates in a loop, and each event matches what happened. There is no moment when something is erased, like the dead grandfather scenario. What makes it paradoxical is the ontological aspect. Where is the first origin? We're used to everything having an initial cause. In a bootstrap loop, the initial cause is hidden within the loop itself. Some philosophers ask, can information or objects exist without an origin? Does this violate conservation laws of mass or energy or information? Shouldn't someone compose Beethoven's music somewhere? Physicist Sergei Krasnikov once remarked that in the bootstrap paradox, the main issue is that the laws of physics seem to permit a system to evolve into a state not determined by anything outside itself. Yet interestingly, Krasnikov and others do not deem the bootstrap paradox impossible. They see it as odd, but not a contradiction, rather a strange consequence of general relativity if closed time-like curves are allowed. That is, nature might permit such loops as long as they are internally consistent. Another term for the bootstrap paradox is the ontological paradox, because it concerns origins of existence. In an ontological paradox, an entity's existence cannot be explained linearly. Instead, it circles back on itself. The pocket watch case is an ontological object paradox, while the Beethoven or lottery note examples are ontological information paradoxes. Information that exists without an original discoverer. Physicists Losev and Novikov coined a vivid label for such entities, jinn, like spirits that appear suddenly and vanish without a trace. Information or objects emerging from a time loop are likened to jinn because they leave no evidence of a cause outside the loop. The bootstrap paradox certainly makes us frown. While it doesn't immediately produce an outright contradiction, it unsettles our intuitions about causation and originality. In fiction, it often evokes a sense of destiny or mystery. A character seems fated from the start to be their own cause within a time loop. Logically, it also challenges concepts like entropy and thermodynamics. For instance, if an object cycles eternally in time, when does it wear out? What about its entropy? Some stories address this, e.g., the watch in Somewhere in Time eventually breaks when the loop is interrupted. With the bootstrap paradox in mind, we can connect it to causal loops. In fact, the bootstrap paradox is one form of causal loop, where an event is the cause of itself. Another form with a slightly different flavor is the predestination paradox. As the name suggests, the predestination paradox involves the idea of a predetermined fate. In time travel, it occurs when someone travels to the past intending to change something, but their actions in the past are precisely what caused the event they were trying to prevent. In other words, attempts to avoid or alter the future become the very cause of that future, a self-fulfilling prophecy that spans time. This is similar to the bootstrap paradox in forming a loop, but it typically involves a conscious attempt to change fate that turns out to be the means by which fate is fulfilled. A concrete example is the film 12 Monkeys, 1995, which builds on the predestination paradox. In it, a man named Cole is sent from a future where humanity is nearly wiped out by a virus back to the past to stop its spread. Ironically, throughout his efforts, Cole becomes an inseparable part of the chain of events that leads to the virus's release. What he does in the past, with the intent to prevent the outbreak, ends up contributing to its very occurrence. This is a tragic fate. His heroic actions are predestined as part of the history he tries to change. Cole even witnesses his own death at an airport, an event he had seen as a child. His childhood memory turns out to be the site of his adult self dying. Thus, the childhood event, effect, motivates his future mission, cause, which brings him back and leads to the same airport death, the same effect, a closed loop of destiny. This is called a predestination paradox because time seems to protect itself. Whatever you do, if you try to change an event that already occurred, your very steps will lead to its fulfillment. In everyday terms, it's like an unavoidable fate. But here, the fate happens precisely because it is resisted. The paradox carries deep irony. A classical analog is Oedipus in Greek myth, though not time travel. Oedipus is prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother. Trying to avoid this, he flees far away, unaware he is adopted. In fleeing, he kills a stranger on the road, his birth father, and marries the widowed Queen of Thebes, his birth mother. His attempt to avoid the prophecy steers him into it. Now imagine an Oedipus-like scenario with a time traveler. They receive a prophecy or knowledge about a future disaster, then travel back to prevent it. But the preventative actions are what trigger it. That's the predestination paradox in time travel. In sci-fi, The Terminator, 1984, is often cited. A soldier, Kyle Reese, is sent from the future to 1984 to protect Sarah Connor so she can later give birth to John Connor, humanity's future leader. Ironically, Reese falls in love with Sarah and becomes John's biological father. John exists because Reese was sent back, and Reese was sent back because John exists in the future to dispatch him. The first film's timeline is predestination consistent. The past is not changed. The loop of destiny is closed. Even Skynet's attempt to change the past by sending a Terminator to kill Sarah fails. That very attempt ensures John's birth by bringing Reese and Sarah together. This is a case where even the villain's attempt to alter the past is absorbed into predestined history. Though in Terminator 2, the story shifts toward alternate timelines, which we'll discuss later. Predestination paradoxes are part of causal loops too, but to clarify, bootstrap paradoxes usually focus on objects or information without origin, whereas predestination paradoxes focus on event chains that loop, often involving attempts to change something that end up causing that very thing. Some literature defines the predestination paradox as the special case where a time traveler goes back to prevent an event, but in doing so, causes that very event. The philosophical impact is profound on the topic of free will versus determinism. If you find yourself in a predestination loop, every effort you make is already written into history. You can't change what has happened, you can only fulfill it. This raises the question, do you have free will here, or are you just enacting a pre-written script? The predestination paradox presents a chilling scenario where knowledge of the future traps us into realizing it. It resembles philosophy problems like Newcomb's paradox or perfect predictor scenarios. If the future is certain, are present decisions free? In many time travel stories, characters are forced to accept that what happened, happened. The traveler cannot change the past and often unknowingly causes events to occur exactly as recorded.
To make this clearer, consider a light analogy. A scientist in the future learns that a massive fire destroyed the National Library 100 years ago. They go back with advanced fire prevention tools to stop it. Suspicious of the stranger, a guard panics, an accident occurs, and the fire breaks out. The very attempt to prevent the blaze causes it. Returning to their own time, the scientist realizes that all along they were the cause of the fire they sought to stop. A loop of destiny forms. The predestination paradox teaches humility about time. Perhaps events unfold as they must, and attempts to change them only affirm that certainty. But as humans, we naturally ask, must it always be this way? Is there an escape, a way for time travel not to be trapped in destiny loops or to avoid logic-wrecking paradoxes? This is where two solution concepts come in. First, the Novikov self-consistency principle, which says that even if time travel exists, the universe ensures that only consistent things can happen. In other words, yes, predestination or bootstrapping can occur, but grandfather-type contradictions are forbidden by nature. Second, multiple timelines or parallel universes, in which a time traveler can kill their grandfather, but the effect doesn't alter their own origin because it creates a different reality. Let's look at each. One of the most interesting physics-based answers to time paradoxes is the Novikov self-consistency principle. Proposed by Russian physicist Igor Novikov in the late 1980s, it essentially states, if time travel to the past is possible, the laws of nature will prevent paradoxes.
Whatever a time traveler does in the past, the final result will be consistent with the history that already occurred. You might influence the past, but only in ways already woven into the historical sequence as recorded. Put simply, the Novikov principle says any event that could cause a paradox has zero probability of occurring. Suppose you go back to the 1950s with a gun to kill your grandfather. According to Novikov, the universe will conspire through ordinary cause and effect to prevent the paradoxical outcome. Grandfather dies before having children, not by a sudden miracle, but via natural contingencies that foil the attempt. Your gun jams at the last second, you slip on a banana peel right before pulling the trigger. Silly, but in principle possible. Or an unknown passerby rescues him in the nick of time. The point is, something will happen so your grandfather survives, because the historical fact is that he did. Proof you were born. You cannot change a consistent historical record. If you succeed, then in the original history that is what happened. Perhaps you were not his biological grandchild or some twist like that. But if it contradicts known history, you know he died peacefully in 1990, then your assassination attempt must fail. Thus, paradox is avoided. The Novikov principle is often illustrated with that billiard ball example. Theoretical physicist Kip Thorne and colleagues analyzed the billiard ball time travel scenario, also known as Polchinski's paradox. They found self-consistent trajectories that avoid paradox. The future ball hits the past ball only with a glancing blow, nudging its path just enough that it still enters the time machine, but at a slightly different angle, producing exactly the ball that emerges in the past to deliver that same glancing blow. Rather than a hard hit that prevents entry, a paradox, the universe chooses the gentle collision scenario that ensures the ball still enters the time machine with the speed and angle required to nudge its earlier self. This is the self-consistent solution. The ball makes a slight change to its earlier self that creates the conditions needed for the loop to occur consistently. Under Novikov, the grandfather paradox is resolved not by banning time travel, but by limiting what can be done in the past. You are free to act, but all your actions are already part of history. In short, you can do anything that did happen, but you cannot do anything that did not happen. A time traveler can play a role in the past only if that role doesn't alter known facts. So if the record says your grandfather died in a car accident in 1970, it could be, fictionally speaking, that you were the driver who, unintentionally, hit him when you time traveled to that year. Shocking, but not paradoxical, because history records his death in 1970 after he'd already had children. What's impossible under Novikov is, say, preventing your grandparents from meeting. Those attempts will always fail somehow because their meeting is part of your consistent history.
This principle brings us close to a scientific version of fate. It doesn't posit an intelligent enforcer, only the natural laws themselves, but the effect is fated. Time travel cannot change what has already happened. At best, it fulfills what has happened. In Novikov's framework, bootstrap and predestination loops are not a problem. In fact, they are the only forms of time travel allowed, those that yield consistent causal loops. Information or objects may appear circularly, becoming time-gin, as long as they don't violate conservation, e.g., energy consistency within the loop. Meanwhile, grandfather-type scenarios, going back to change something inconsistently, will be automatically thwarted by nature. Many stories align with this view. For example, in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, time travel is consistent. What Harry does when he goes back 3 hours is precisely what had happened already. There is no altered timeline, only a time loop. This fits Novikov, no paradox. The comedy Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure also shows the duo returning to the past and then having already hidden items, keys, etc., to help themselves later. Everything works because they always did it. They're just carrying out a consistent reality. From the scientific side, recent work and simulations examine whether quantum mechanics allows consistency. A 2020 study, for instance, modeled that in quantum systems, even if there's a potential paradox, like a quantum analog of the grandfather paradox, outcome probabilities adjust so that contradictions don't arise. There's also research by Lorenzo McCone and collaborators, and in 2025 by Lorenzo Gavesino, suggesting that when quantum mechanics and thermodynamics are included, self-consistency can be achieved. Gavesino argues that quantum fluctuations on closed time-like curves can erase local entropy and make changes effectively non-permanent. So paradoxes like killing your grandfather are avoided because the final state remains consistent. He even claims to derive Novikov's principle directly from quantum equations without extra assumptions, as if nature inherently prevents contradictions. Novikov also resonates with the block universe view in the philosophy of time, the idea that past, present, and future all exist in a four-dimensional space-time block. If you go to the past, you are always there. There is no changing the past because the past already includes your arrival. This matches the intuition. You can't change the past, you can only make it exactly what it is. Novikov is an attempt to formalize this intuition scientifically. Elegant as it is, the principle isn't without challenges. It implies that every potential paradox-inducing attempt must fail. Hard to test since we lack time machines. Still, Novikov makes time travel not immediately impossible. It offers consistency. Some, however, are unsatisfied because it feels constraining, like living a pre-written script. Thus, an alternative idea arises. Instead of forcing consistency within one timeline, what if each potential paradox causes the universe to branch into a new timeline? This is the multiple timelines or parallel universes theory. A popular fictional solution to avoid paradoxes is multiple timelines or parallel universes. The basic idea: if you go back and change something, you don't change the past of your original timeline. Instead, you create or move into an alternate timeline where the change applies. Your original timeline remains intact, so there's no paradox of you vanishing because your grandfather died. The grandfather you killed belongs to a different reality, not your original one. This invokes the multiverse, many parallel universes with different histories. Consider Back to the Future again, but through the multiple timelines lens. In the first film, Marty interferes with his parents' meeting and then fixes it. Yet when he returns to 1985, his life has improved, his father is successful, etc., not exactly as before. This suggests Marty returned to a slightly different timeline caused by his intervention. A multiverse interpretation, the original timeline in which his father was timid branched into a new timeline in which his father is confident. The film isn't explicit, but it's one way to read it. Marty doesn't vanish permanently. His changes place him in an alternate timeline where he still exists, but with a different family history. Many other fictions adopt this more explicitly. The Marvel Cinematic Universe in Avengers: Endgame spells out a branching timeline model. Changing the past doesn't change your original future. It creates a new reality. The Flash in 2023 and the series Dark also treat changes to the past as creating branches.
Mechanically, suppose you live in timeline A in 2025. You travel to 1970 and kill your grandfather from timeline A. Under the multiple timeline theory, your act actually triggers timeline B, an alternate reality, at that 1970 point, where your grandfather dies and perhaps you will never be born in B. But you are fine, because you come from A, not B. A and B now proceed in parallel. You're stuck in B because your time machine landed you there, while in A, from their perspective, you disappeared in 2025. You left and didn't return. In B, your counterpart might never be born, yet you still exist in B as a visitor from A, although you may not be able to have your family future there because you erased your lineage in that reality. Wild as it sounds, it's internally consistent within each timeline. A is consistent. Grandfather wasn't killed in 1970. You were born in 1990. You left in 2025. Your family just wonders where you went. B is also consistent. Grandfather died in 1970. Your parent never existed. You in B are an immigrant from A. The grandfather paradox is avoided because the killed and the killer don't share the same causal lineage in one timeline. Superhero comics and films love this approach, as noted in many discussions. Marvel and DC both use sprawling multiverses. Changing the past routinely yields a new branch. In X-Men Days of Future Past, attempts to alter the past create a parallel world with Sentinels emanating versus a main world that's saved. This branching concept is often loosely associated with the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which says every quantum outcome yields a branching universe. Some, like David Deutsch, have speculated that time travel might mean hopping between branches. Deutsch even built a mathematical framework in which a quantum particle traverses a closed time-like curve, achieves self-consistency by involving many worlds. The particle enters the time machine in World 1 and emerges in World 2, sidestepping paradox because it needn't be consistent with its original world. Yet from the traveler's perspective, it feels like time travel. In Deutsch's approach, the grandfather paradox is avoidable. You can shoot your grandfather in the past, but it's the grandfather of another world, not yours. Thus, there's no contradiction in your original world. Critics note that for macroscopic objects, this implies splitting across worlds particle by particle, which is technically thorny. The advantage of the multiverse solution is that it doesn't restrict the time traveler's freedom. You truly can do anything in the past of the world you visit, including things that would be paradoxical in a single timeline. The laws of nature needn't stop you from pulling the trigger. You might succeed, only the consequences won't undo your origin because you've created or moved to a different reality. Nothing in one history is changed, rather a new history is created. So multiverses provide a safe lane for the universe to permit change without wrecking logic. But this comes with staggering consequences. Philosophically, if every possibility becomes real, then there are nearly infinite parallel universes. Every tiny decision could, in principle, split a timeline. Who then are you if there are many of you in many worlds? Does every choice generate another you making the opposite choice? Personal identity becomes tricky. Are all those versions equally you, or is each a distinct person? This drifts into metaphysics. There's also a moral issue. If in another universe people live a different fate, what happens to justice or well-being? Imagine one world avoids catastrophe while another still suffers. From a meta perspective, one humanity is lucky while another is doomed. Do we care only about our own branch? Suppose you go back and save someone in 1990, then return home. Are you happy?
In the new branch, that person lives. But in your original branch, unchanged, that person died, and a version of you remembers that. You created a world where they live, but the world where they died still exists, perhaps inaccessible. It's a multiverse butterfly effect. Every scenario happens somewhere. There's also a physics concern. Where does the energy come from to create a whole new universe every time there's a branch? A single universe contains an enormous amount of energy. If time travel spawns new universes, it seems conjure energy from nowhere on a cosmic scale, clashing with conservation laws unless there's some overarching conservation across the multiverse or some share-out mechanism which is speculative and lacks concrete theory. Stephen Hawking disliked parallel timeline fixes. He proposed the chronology protection conjecture, the idea that physics prevents time travel altogether, forbidding CTCs, because the universe protects its chronology. But even if multiverses exist, Hawking argued travelers may still experience a single consistent history rather than hopping worlds. In other words, either time travel is impossible, or, if possible, it's self-consistent in one universe, not a universe-hopping affair.
So far, we've surveyed core paradoxes and two solution camps. Novikov, one consistent timeline, versus multiple timelines, branching. Each is appealing. Novikov is elegant but constraining. Multiple timelines are liberating but make reality vastly more complex. Which is correct? No one knows. Backward time travel hasn't been achieved to test it. Perhaps, as Hawking suggested, the universe protects itself so thoroughly that time machines are impossible. Singularities or quantum effects stop loops from forming. The discussion doesn't end there. We should mention the quantum realm, where certain phenomena seem paradoxical regarding time and causality. Let's turn to paradoxes in quantum physics, especially quantum entanglement and retrocausality. In quantum physics, there's a phenomenon that bothered Albert Einstein so much he called it spooky action at a distance, quantum entanglement. Two particles can be so deeply correlated that whatever happens to particle A instantly determines the state of particle B, even if they're far apart. For example, if two particles are entangled, measuring the spin of A on Earth immediately fixes the spin of B on the Moon in the opposite direction, as if they communicated instantly. To Einstein, this seemed to violate the speed of light limit and local causality. If influences can propagate faster than light, relativity suggests you could send signals into the past. This is the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox from 1935. Though called a paradox, EPR isn't a time paradox like killing your grandfather or bootstrap loops. It challenges classical realism and locality. Einstein and colleagues argued quantum mechanics must be incomplete if it allows entanglement, because it offends causal intuition. But experiments, Aspect, Clauser, Zeilinger, Nobel 2022, show entanglement is real and produces correlations that exceed classical bounds. Crucially, instantaneous correlation is not the same as instantaneous communication. You cannot use entanglement alone to send controlled messages. Quantum measurement outcomes are random. Although correlated, you can't choose the bit you send. And to verify correlations, you still need classical communication, limited by light speed. Therefore, entanglement does not let you send messages to the past. The universe still protects global causality.
the EPR paradox is resolved by understanding that entanglement violates locality, but not the no signaling principle. It's weird, but there's no timeline violation. Why talk about entanglement here? Because many lay explanations mistakenly think it enables instant or backward communication. It doesn't. There are other quantum experiments that tease our intuitions about time, such as the delayed choice quantum eraser. These show that how we measure a particle can affect whether it displays wave-like or particle-like behavior after it has passed part of the apparatus. In the erasure with delay, it can look as if a later choice determines an earlier pattern. Yet again, no useful information goes back in time. Without combining later data, the earlier detector record looks random. You cannot exploit this to message your past self. Some interpretations allow language about future influencing the past. John Kramer's transactional interpretation portrays quantum interactions as a handshake between advanced or backward in time and retarded or forward in time, yielding a consistent outcome. Again, not paradox forming, more like a micro-Novikov at each event. There's also speculative work on quantum time machines via post-selection, Seth Lloyd and others, simulating CTCs in quantum circuits. The upshot: when you try a quantum version of the grandfather paradox on a qubit, quantum mechanics provides self-consistent probabilistic solutions. The qubit evolves into a mixed state that avoids contradiction. Some popular explanations liken this to timelines in superposition that interfere to remove paradox. Depending on viewpoint, quantum mechanics seems to support either consistency, Novikov style, or multiverses, many worlds. Uniquely, both earlier solutions to time paradoxes can live within quantum frameworks. Many worlds literally comes from quantum theory, while Lloyd-style models use consistency via post-selection. Beyond entanglement, people often cite Schrödinger's cat, alive and dead until observed, as a quantum paradox, though it's not about time, but about superposition versus macroscopic reality. We mention it only because quantum equals paradox is a common misconception. In the context of time travel, quantum mechanics serves more as a speculative tool for avoiding logical contradictions than spawning new ones.
There's a tempting thought. If we combine entanglement with relativity, could we communicate with the past? The consensus is no, because every seemingly promising trick fails at transmitting controllable information. Suppose you and a friend share entangled particles, yours on Earth, theirs on Mars. You want to send the message, "Don't do X," to your friend's past. You can't make your local outcomes convey that message. They're random. Even if your friend tries clever tricks, the final data remain random or symmetrically distributed. And to compare results, you need classical signals that obey light speed limits. Another well-known idea is entanglement plus faster than light travel equals time machine. If you could send anything FTL, relativity permits closed causal loops, receiving a message before it's sent. But physics gives us no FTL messaging or travel. So although entanglement suggests instantaneous correlations, the universe ensures no usable information flows faster than light. It's a kind of built-in causality protection at the quantum level. In short, the entanglement paradox challenges locality, but not temporal order. Einstein called it paradoxical, but physicists now accept entanglement as real, non-local, and yet acausal with respect to signaling. In our time paradox saga, this yields a lesson.
The universe appears very good at safeguarding overall causal consistency, even if at the microscopic level it indulges in strange effects. Entanglement blurs who influences whom, but ultimately no one receives a future message that can alter the past. If time travel exists, nature may likewise use mechanisms, Novikov-style consistency or multiverse branching, to prevent logical breakdown. Having explored the paradoxes and their scientific fixes, let's reflect on the broader philosophical meaning. Time paradoxes force us to rethink fundamentals. Do we truly have the freedom to change the future? Is time linear like an arrow, or do past, present, and future coexist? What about cause and effect? Must cause always precede effect, or can there be causal circles? Determinism versus free will. In predestination or Novikov scenarios, the universe is deterministic. The future cannot be changed. Every attempt merely confirms the path. This recalls old philosophical debates. If God or the universe knows everything, are humans really free? In the time travel version, if you know the future, say you receive a note from your tomorrow self, can you choose differently? If yes, the note is wrong, a contradiction. If no, you're trapped by fate. Knowing the future can undermine free will. Philosophers discuss similar themes in Newcomb's paradox and perfect predictor thought experiments. In time travel, the traveler with future knowledge becomes their own perfect predictor. If multiple timelines are real, time resembles a branching tree. Which reality is the reality? All of them or only one? Does each branch contain its own version of our existence? That touches identity and consciousness. Are you in timeline A and you in B the same person or different individuals? This is still the domain of philosophical fiction, not established science. Causal loops like the bootstrap paradox challenge the idea of a first cause. Philosophy often asks about an unmoved mover or a prime cause. Bootstrap loops present a concrete example of causation without a first cause, almost an analog of self-created being on a small scale. Can we accept an entity existing without an origin? Scientifically, we're challenged. What about conservation and entropy? Perhaps a time loop forms a closed system with consistent entropy. Some argue bootstrap loops are like closed solutions in mathematics, odd but not impossible.
Ethics of time travel. If timelines branch, what are a traveler's responsibilities? They might save millions in a new branch, but the original branch remains tragic. Are they obliged to go back? Is each timeline morally separate? Fiction often gives characters the dilemma of choosing one branch over another. Parallel universes practically generate multiverse ethics, consequences not in one world but across many. Justice. Why, in one universe, does someone succeed in killing Hitler, yielding peace, while in another they fail, yielding suffering? From a meta view, there is no balancing. This challenges our assumption of a single moral narrative to the universe. Human longing. Time paradoxes are compelling because they touch human wishes, regrets about the past. If only I could go back. Dreams of changing fate, curiosity about the future. These stories ask, if we truly could, should we change the past? What if we cannot foresee the consequences? Even without paradoxes, chaos theory reminds us that small changes can have huge effects, the butterfly effect. Is it wise to tamper with history? Philosophical takeaway. Ultimately, time paradoxes suggest that time and causality may not be as simple as our daily experience implies. Perhaps the world is more interwoven, entangled, and structured so that paradoxes cannot arise. Or perhaps every possibility really happens in some other universe, and we only see one path. Either way,
we are humbled by the cosmos. One thing is clear. As far as we know, no time paradox has ever been observed in the real world. Either the universe forbids travel to the past, or if it happens, it cleverly evades situations where we could prove a paradox. This may hint that the causal order is a sturdy pillar of reality. Time, as the saying goes, is like a river that flows one way. Maybe humans will never swim against its current without drowning in contradictions. Even so, exploring time paradoxes is valuable. It pushes science to test the limits of concepts like relativity and quantum mechanics, forces philosophy to rethink fate and choice, and inspires art and popular culture to tell stories in creative ways. These paradoxes are intellectual puzzles that both entertain and enlighten. We've taken a long journey, ironically, a journey across the concept of time. From the grandfather paradox that warns us off tinkering with the past, to the bootstrap paradox that presents originless objects, from the predestination paradox that underscores the power of fate, to principles and theories like Novikov and the multiverse that try to rescue us from logical tangles. We also peeked into the quantum world and saw that at a fundamental level, the universe has its own strangeness, yet still respects the broad outline of causality. Will humanity one day solve this mystery? Might we eventually find a way to communicate with the past or visit the future and return? If so, the paradoxes above await real-world tests. Perhaps the outcome will confirm one scenario. Either time machines are impossible, vindicating Hawking, or if they work, using them is like walking on thin ice, governed by invisible rules that keep the surface of time from cracking, Novikov style. Or perhaps, as much new fiction imagines, time travelers will hop between parallel dimensions, exploring many versions of history without damaging their origin. What is certain is that this topic teaches intellectual humility. Time is not just the ticking of a wall clock. It's a concept bound up with our very existence. Time paradoxes invite us to think like children again, asking what would happen if, and finding the universe answering with riddles.